My name is Dr. Hassid, and I'm Associate Medical Director of IHH here in Sacramento. I've been here for about a year, and it's been a wonderful journey and great to see us expand the way we're going to be expanding. I have the honor of moderating the question and answer session, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. But before I do that, I'd like to extend a sincere thanks again to Dr. Max and Mr. Kresser for presenting us with valuable, clinically applicable information that we can take home. Round of applause. So to briefly review what I learned, and we all learned, I think, today, Dr. Max revealed to us the importance of respecting our biological clocks. We learned from her that our cells have biological clocks that relate to sleep, wake, light, dark, and or feeding cycles, and that respecting and nurturing our natural circadian rhythms are critical to optimizing our health as well as preventing and treating chronic disease. Mr. Kresser was able to reassure us, thankfully, that our genetic blueprint does not necessarily dictate our health and longevity trajectory. In other words, our genes can be influenced to be expressed and suppressed, for better or for worse. He made a strong case for the notion that nutrition, supplementation, emotional, social, spiritual health, sleep quality, exercise, and environmental exposures all have a significant influence on genetic expression, which ultimately impacts health, chronic disease prevention, and treatment, and likely longevity. So for us, we at IHH would like to thank you all for coming out tonight and supporting us and the semi-annual event that we've been putting on for the past few years. We believe that knowledge is a most powerful stimulus for instilling positive change. We at IHH all have a passion for what we do, and we enjoy sharing cutting-edge information with community members like yourselves on areas of wellness and longevity medicine. Our vision at IHH across the whole region is to promote a healthy society, because a healthy society is vibrant, happy, and productive, which truly is a definition of wealth. What we do at IHH takes a lot of dedication, passion, innovation, and hard work. It truly is a labor of love. It's a unique type of care that focuses on restoring wellness, which is much more difficult to achieve than just symptom palliation that we're typically used to seeing. There are not that many of us in the area that do what we do, which is unfortunate. As a matter of fact, we are the only large organization in all of Northern California that offers comprehensive, integrative, and functional medicine services, and we actually applaud Sutter Health for having the vision to support this venture.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you, Eric. The demand for our services in Sacramento has been exploding. We moved to a new clinic space 3 years ago, and we have already way outstripped the space that we need with the new clinicians that have joined us. Our waiting list continues to be over 500 people. We get more than 200 referrals every month that we are able to accommodate. We have architectural plans that are in the way for moving to a new space that is near the Sutter Medical Group Pediatrics office on Stockton Boulevard. We will more than double our space, and we will be able to more than double the number of people that we serve. So we are just seeing the explosion of interest in people who are looking for something more than a pill or a procedure when they're not feeling well. Many people recognize that they are able to recover and get well, and they're looking for support for that. We need help from the community. Sutter Health has been incredibly supportive of us, and there are huge demands in healthcare everywhere, so we are one small piece of that. We encourage you to look at what we're doing, look at our website, support us in any way that you can. We have some drawings and pictures out in the waiting area about the new clinic space that we are looking at here in Sacramento. We are also trying to build out space in the cancer center, the new cancer center at Sutter Roseville, and to be able to provide integrated medicine services there. We have a new physician who's joining us next month, and she's going to be working primarily out in Roseville, but we need more room for those practitioners as well. We are a tax-deductible nonprofit institute that people can contribute to help further our cause. We need your support, so we encourage you to talk to any of us. There's donation, philanthropic information out in the lobby. Our development people are here tonight. So if in any way that you are able to contribute to us, we are very grateful for anything that you can provide.
Excellent. Thank you. On that note, so we're going to move on to the question and answer session. If you have a question, please come up to the front, and Antonio here, who's running down the aisles, has the microphone, and he's going to hold on to it while you ask the question. There's only two basic rules to this game. First off, please ask only one brief question so that we can allow for more questions from other attendees. And secondly, keep the questions general. Please refrain from revealing any significant personal health information that you don't want 400 people to know about. You can address the questions to any or all of us up here, me included. So let's get started. If you have any questions, just come on up and we'll get going.
Come on down to the Price is Your Life.
Shut this down. I need to advertise myself.
What do you think about the supplement Methylated B complex?
So as we discussed, we were talking about DNA methylation in the presentation as one of the mechanisms for regulating gene expression, and I mentioned the study that showed that methyl donors like B12 and folate and B6, which are in a methylated B complex, can improve methylation and thus have benefits on health. But you can also you can get too much methylation. So, and that's called overmethylation, and that can have, that can create a situation where you're shutting off too many genes. And so the best option there is to, if you're see an integrative or functional medicine provider, they can do some testing to determine how well you're methylating, and then advise you on whether it makes sense to take methyl donor supplements. Small doses are probably okay for most people, but the higher doses that are often sold and advised can actually be potentially harmful in some situations.
That's especially interesting in the area of cancer, because there's a couple of studies looking at if you give too much B vitamins, methylation, folic acid, you can actually increase your risk and make things worse. Because again, methylation turns off certain genes, but it can also turn off the genes you don't want to turn off. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. So balance, like Chris was saying, is really important.
And many B vitamin, like B complexes, have very high doses of B vitamins as opposed to taking a multivitamin, which generally has much lower levels.
Great. Thank you. We just need some dance music to go with the flash. Boom, 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 boom. All right, we have a personal friend that has a question.
Can you talk a little bit about how much GMOs and Roundup contribute, and how important is it that we really pay more and get organic food?
I think all of us are big fans of organic foods. I think the more we try to limit our exposure to environmental toxins, including pesticides and BPA and heavy metals, the more we reduce that exposure, the better. There's some data that glyphosate in Roundup has a negative impact on the gut microbiome, in addition to other potential DNA effects in the cells. So there's a lot of emerging evidence. I think what we don't do in the United States is use the precautionary principle the way they do in Europe, which means if we're not clear that something is completely safe, then we don't use it. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the way of industry in the United States.
Good. Okay, good question.
Hi. So in regards to timed eating early, what is your recommendation for nursing mothers, pregnant mothers, and babies?
Thank you.
Nurses throughout the night, so yeah. And so I eat a lot, being a nursing mom.
Can you repeat the question?
I can
What-
answer.
You got it.
Yeah. I think the priority when you're pregnant or nursing is to nourish your baby as much as you can, and that means nourishing yourself. And I mean, I'd be curious to hear your opinion, but I personally don't advise anything like intermittent fasting or time restricted eating for pregnant or nursing mothers for that reason, because you're really building another life, and that takes a lot of energy and an increase in calories, and any kind of restriction there, especially for your baby, it wouldn't apply here.
Agreed?
Yep.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to make an assumption here that many of us in this room have the privilege of doing many of the things you recommend: eating healthy, getting the right rest, getting that right exercise, and sleeping well. And there's many people in our communities who work 2 jobs. They have a lot of responsibilities. And how do we address those issues for those people who don't have the privilege that we might to help them become more healthy?
That's a great question. I wish I knew the answer to that, but you're absolutely right in pointing out that this is a systemic problem that is deeply rooted in many different aspects of the way that our culture and society is set up. And so, for example, shift work. 25% of non-military Americans are engaged in shift work, and many people don't have the option of just quitting their job and choosing a new job. So in those situations, like for example, one of the things that our clinic does is we have a wellness program that we've done with the Berkeley Fire Department and also now the Santa Clara Fire Department. So first responders often have really whacked out sleep schedules and circadian rhythms, and they're doing it for the best possible reason, to be there for other people when they need help. And so we've worked with them on how to mitigate the impacts of that with some simple things, like I was mentioning, the glasses that you can wear to filter out blue light, and using blackout shades and eye covers when you are sleeping during the day to try to mimic the effects of darkness that you would be exposed to at night. And they're finding ways to cook together as a group in the fire station and support each other in making some of these changes. So I certainly don't have an answer to your question. It's a big question and one that deserves consideration. But I think there are a lot of small steps that can be taken that can have actually quite a big impact.
Yeah, I think education and taking small steps, which we can all do. I also think that every major change in medicine throughout history has generally been driven by consumers, not by a medical establishment. If you look at smoking, tobacco was, when I was in residency, everybody smoked in the hospital, and now we wouldn't think of it. So, what felt like an unchangeable trend has now completely shifted. It might have taken us 50 years, but I think as each of us start to become educated and more conscious, we start to shift how our community and our culture changes. So the more changes that each of us can start to make, the more influence that we will have for the future.
Probably one of the biggest things we can do that all of us can do today is there's this notion of the sedentary lifestyle. And they're finding that if you actually have a standing desk or sit in the therapy ball, for example, that actual activity of standing counterbalances any effects that you can have from the negative effects. So for example, exercise is not even as beneficial as just being active. So it's amazing how just like we have a standing desk, we have a therapy ball, because we're sitting all day long at a computer. So those little things can make it dramatic, and actually that is probably more effective at reducing A1C diabetes than even just exercise. So standing and activity is critical, and that everybody can do.
I had had a question about something that was said. On the one hand, you mentioned that genes can change very quickly, but then on the other hand, you mentioned a study with the mice. The first generation was exposed to, I believe, like toxins from the environment, and that infertility was passed along for like 4 generations. So does that mean that we cannot change negative changes in our genes that our parents or previous generations incurred, or is there something we could do to address those?
Can everyone hear the question? Is the
Yeah, I
mic
think
working?
That mic is not on.
I think the mic is off, Antonio, maybe?
Test.
Maybe get closer.
Where's my sound guy?
It's on for you.
Maybe for you only. Get really close.
You wanted to repeat
So
it?
Do it again. Repeat
the
again.
question was basically studies have shown, as I mentioned, that epigenetics, the very definition shows that it suggests that changes in gene expression that can be passed on to a future generation. So, whereas on the other hand, we know that we can make changes that will affect our genes our gene expression in real time. So how do you balance those different influences? I think the research is pretty clear that, like I said, choices even our grandparents made and our parents made do affect our health and risk of disease, but that impact is far less significant than the changes that we make in our life during our lifetime. And the evidence for that is watching what happens when people move from eating a traditional diet and lifestyle into a modern lifestyle, and watching the shifts in their health that occur. Their genes didn't change during that time, but nor did the changes in gene expression that they inherited from their parents and grandparents in that situation change. They still had that influence going. And yet, while they were following their traditional diet and lifestyle, those influences that they inherited from their previous generations, whether the genes themselves or the gene expression changes that were passed down, weren't enough to trigger any disease until they then added that predisposition to the influence of environmental factors that were harmful. And then once that combination happens, the type of disease that person develops will be influenced by their genes and heritable changes in gene expression. So I think that's the best way to think about it.
Hi, thank you so much for everything. I have a question. I think you likely touch base on medical students and poor sleeping habits. And I was wondering if you have any perspective around having those poor sleeping habits for a number of years, and if that has any effect in the long run, or if that's okay. If you have any perspective around that.
I think that's a really challenging question because of the nature of medical education and so much a part of the culture around sleep deprivation and ignoring our physical needs. Just as there hasn't been education in medical schools and residencies for nutrition and lifestyle and circadian rhythm and epigenetics, at least some of the stuff that Chris was talking about. I do think it's starting to shift. I read an article recently about a company in Europe, a very large company, and they allowed their employees to work according to their chronotype. So if people worked best in the morning, they went to bed early, they were early risers, they were more productive in the morning, they allowed their employees to do that, and their employee satisfaction went from 30% to 100%, and their productivity skyrocketed. So, I think as we start to look at some of those things, but these are really deeply ingrained, embedded cultural myths in medical education, medical training, and it's going to take a lot of effort for us to change it, just as a lot of our, the medical system now is, sadly to say, it's a business to some extent, and the pharmaceutical industry is a business, and the food industry is a business, and shifting more towards what Chris was talking about, in really returning to the natural things that help to keep us naturally healthy. It's an uphill struggle.
So I think part of that question too is about, can damage be undone? Right? We all want to know that, because we've all probably made some choices that we would like to change if we could go back in time. This is one of the most exciting developments in science and medicine in the past few decades, has been the discovery of neuroplasticity. Has everybody heard that term? You know what it means? It essentially means that we can change the structure and function of our brain, and those changes will actually affect gene expression in every cell in the body. And Eric Kandel won the Nobel Prize for discovering this. That's incredible. That is one of the most hopeful discoveries, perhaps ever, because what it means is we can actually, through our lifestyle, through our behavior, through our experiences, and even through our thoughts and emotions, we can change the structure and function of our brains. So this is neuroscience, now. We're not talking about woo-woo kind of new age. Like, this is in the realm of neuroscience, and this has been shown with MRIs and scans, and what that means is, like, some of the assumptions that we made before are probably not true. This idea that, if you do some damage, if you're making poor choices, that's just permanently going to affect you for the rest of your life. Maybe it would have and maybe it still will, if you don't engage in these kind of new choices that will have a different impact. So it means we have even more control over our health than we previously understood.
Hi there. Since we live in a society in which we benefit from police officers, fire department, and medical care all hours, how much research has been done into shift work, and where would you like to see future research directed to mitigate the effects of working these hours?
Well, there's been some studies looking at the effects of shift work for nurses, for example, and they found that nurses who actually would work night shift had a higher incidence of breast cancer and other forms of cancer. Now, the argument, of course, is going to be with the chronology, and the shifts of melatonin production is critical in that, and melatonin is a very important protective hormone. So there's research in that regard. Again, knowing how long and to what extent is more challenging, I think. Again, education matters. But again, we need 24-hour people. We need 24-hour police officers and nurses, so I don't know how that's going to change it. But again, if we can do, like Chris was saying, if we can mitigate some of the screen time and things that we can do to help mitigate that damage, that's going to be the best that we probably can do in reality.
Yeah, to answer your question about what research I'd like to see is, I'd like to see some of these steps, set up a study where one group is taking steps to mitigate the effects through, light, getting exposure to bright light, for example, during, to stimulate their brain to, at the right time, and then, using blackout shades and other devices. There are even some devices now you can put in your ear, and it emits light to retrain your circadian rhythm. I use it when I travel. Like a couple years ago, I went to the UK to do some speaking, and I used it to shift my circadian clock to the new time zone. I started to use it beforehand. So there are a lot of new technologies and applications that are becoming available that can help with mitigation, but they haven't, and some have been studied, but not all together as an intervention. And that's actually we're starting to work on that a little bit with the Berkeley Fire Department and the Santa Clara Fire Department, because that's their biggest concern.
One of the quick other challenges too is if you block out too much blue light in people who are like nurses who are working, you'll get sleepy. That's the whole purpose. So it's like, in a way, you want to block out some blue light, but if you block out 85% of your blue light, your melatonin goes right up and you'll kind of want to fall asleep. So we got to be careful about how much we're blocking out these people are working.
Thank you. I'll try to disguise two questions as one so I don't break your rule. They're related. So the whole notion of circadian rhythm seems intuitively true to me. I mean, a routine life sort of feels healthier. But I grow dubious when we can gather such precise and detailed data now that I wonder about making generalizations about what we're looking at. For example, an 8-hour window for eating versus a 12-hour window, you can measure changes in insulin production and some of the other biological indicators that you described up there. But my question is, how much tolerance is there in the body for a range of those things such that, yes, I can optimize something according to our common definitions of what is healthy by eating in an 8-hour window, which is a definite lifestyle change and would probably throw Mulvaney's out of business. But if I just refuse not to, if I maintain a 12-hour window, will the cost of that actually amount to much of a cost in terms of how healthy I feel or its measurable effects on my body? I guess I better hold up that question.
I think part of it depends on what your particular biological measures are. How is your blood pressure, your insulin levels, your insulin resistance, your markers of health versus chronic inflammation or illness. We don't know what the optimal windows are. We just know that we have gone way beyond what most humans were, intended to do. So it's an area that's I think rich for research, but what is the optimal window for everyone is not clear. We also know, in some countries in Europe, in Spain, some of the Mediterranean countries, which are can be very healthy, they may not start eating dinner until 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. So, but anyway, I think it's just something to pay attention to. If I have a patient who's really struggling with that, yep.
Can I tell just a brief story about that? Because I love that question, and I think it's really important. There's a lot of important stuff in there. When I was still in school, and I was doing a kind of internship with a macrobiotic chef, or an apprenticeship. I was learning with her, and she cooked for cancer patients, and we were working with a kind of early functional medicine doctor, pioneer at that time. And there was a young man who was really sick coming into the clinic. He was losing a lot of weight. He was already pretty emaciated. And he was just eliminating more and more foods from his diet. The last time we saw him for a period of time, he was down to like chicken breast and broccoli and a few other foods, and he looked like he was going to die. It was pretty scary. And we didn't see him for like 6 to 9 months, and then he came back to the clinic, and he looked like a completely different person. He put on 25 or 30 pounds. He had color in his face. He was happy. And we asked him, we were like, what was it? What was it a macrobiotic diet, a vegan diet, paleo wasn't around at that point, but what did you do? And he said, it was the beer and pizza diet. And basically he got to the point where he had restricted food so much that he had no life. He lost his girlfriend, he lost all of his friends, he was just living in a completely isolated way, and he had given up. He thought he might die, and so he's like, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna go out eating beer and pizza. So he, at least a couple times a night went out with his friends and ate pizza and drank beer, and he recovered. And so the point of this is not to eat pizza and drink beer to recover. The point is, to the questioner who asked before, we do have to consider the impact of the choices that we make. And there's more to health than food. And there's even more to health than sleep. So, sometimes we need to balance the choices we make depending on what our goals are and our needs are, and not, I think there's a kind of mentality out there now of the optimizer, the biohacker that's got spreadsheets and is constantly trying to optimize everything. And I think that's a trap.
Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest predictors of our health and well-being is actually not our exercise and nutrition. It's our joy. It's our connection with other people. It's our sense of purpose, of gratitude, of contribution, of feeling like there's something that we're here for. That is one of the most predictive components of how well we do. Johanna, our colleague, talks about that, what's your happy place? How do you find those things that really light you up? And if it's beer and pizza, that is, really fortifying your chi, that may be the answer for you.
Hopefully you don't have celiac disease.
Okay, these will be our last two questions.
Hi. I suffer from chronic atopic dermatitis, so eczema, and I'm so glad that it's now being understood as a chronic inflammatory disease. I'm a part of several community groups that do focus on bettering factors of our epizone to try to reverse this disease, most importantly being nutrition and diet. There is a success, but the experiences and techniques are vastly different. Some are plant-based, some are keto, some are carnivore. So as an individual, how can I find an approach that's best for me in terms of being most effective in, stimulating a epigenetic transformation to, reverse this disease?
Yeah, trial and error actually tends to work best. And I'm not a big, I use therapeutic diets in my practice for specific purposes, but I generally will try to get people to expand their diet as much as they can tolerate as soon as they can, within the template of healthy foods, not including donuts and cheese doodles and big gulps, but I think extremely restrictive diets like the carnivore diet, where you completely eliminate all plant foods, might have a therapeutic benefit for a short period of time, but every healthy culture that we've ever studied has eaten a combination of some animal foods and some plant foods. And so like a dietary approach that completely eliminates the plant foods would make me pretty wary. I think the biggest thing that I've seen for people with eczema is just removing processed and refined foods, and then focusing on anti-inflammatory, nutrient-dense foods. And that could look like a paleo type of diet, could look like a keto type of diet, although I don't necessarily recommend that for long term if you're not under supervision. Could look like maybe a vegetarian diet if it's done wisely. But I think you just have to go with your gut and choose something and try it and experiment. That's ultimately what produces the best results.
My question is about the breast cancer gene, BRCA1 and 2, and other known deleterious mutations, which are known or estimated to have an incidence of people with that gene might have a risk of getting breast cancer estimated as high as 40 to 80%. So what does the role of lifestyle play in preventing breast cancer in someone with a gene like that versus more conventional medical treatments like prophylactic preventive surgery, lots of routine screenings, MRIs, mammograms regularly?
Well, in the presentation I mentioned that most of disease risk is environmentally determined, but I didn't say all. There are definitely conditions that we know of that are exclusively genetically driven. If you have that gene, you will develop that disease no matter what. And there are conditions for which genes seem to play a more predominant role than other chronic diseases. And the Braca genes are one of them. Schizophrenia, I mentioned, is highly heritable, considered to be a highly heritable condition. So there's a range. It's like a spectrum, but even in that spectrum, that doesn't mean that environmental factors won't be important. And again, we know that because we look at traditional populations that had those same genes but didn't develop the diseases at the same rate. So it's always a combination. It just may mean that if you have those particular genes, your awareness might be heightened compared to someone who doesn't, and you may need to maybe pay a little bit more attention than somebody who doesn't have those particular genes.
There was also a very fascinating study done at Stanford recently where they did gene analysis for people, and they looked at two sets of genes. One was around exercise tolerance, and the other was around hunger and the ability to tolerate hunger. So in the hunger group, they took people who had the gene where they were able to regulate their appetite. Half of them they told, you don't have this gene, it's going to be really hard for you to regulate your appetite. And the other half they said, you have this gene, you're going to be fine. They did the same thing with the exercise tolerance group. So whether people had the gene or not, they told some of them you do have the gene, and others they said no, you don't. And then they tested them. And what they found was that, yes, if you were told that you would have trouble regulating your hunger, even if your genes showed that that was not the case for you, those people had trouble regulating their hunger. And in addition to that, they also saw physiologic changes in their blood suggestive of difficulty tolerating hunger. So it ties in with the neuroplasticity, that just because we have a gene, if we believe it's going to have an adverse effect on it, it probably will be more likely to have an adverse effect on us. So, the author said we really need to be cautious about all of the genetic testing that we're doing with people, because sometimes it may put us into a mindset of fear and worry that we are going to have this illness because we have a genetic change, when in fact it's still very unclear. So if you have been tested for that particular gene, you have a family history or whatever, I think it's important to pay attention to what lies between your ears, in addition to eating your vegetables and getting your sleep.
Yeah, people often would come into our clinic asking, should I get a 23andMe test? That's the genetic test. And I said, well, how much do you want to know? And they go, well, I really, really want to know because of X, Y, and Z. I'm going, well, is that going to scare you into getting the disease, or is it going to empower you? And if they say it's going to empower me, then I'll recommend doing it. But even sometimes when you make those changes, sometimes you don't know what the gobbledygook means. So you just have to understand when you're getting the testing, what are your goals? Because if your goals are just to be paranoid, that, like Max was saying, that's going to make things a lot worse. So, all right. Awesome.
All right. Thank you guys for those excellent
Thanks for all the
questions.
great